Buenos dias and welcome back to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast, everybody, with your host, myself, as ever, Alex Connor, where we talk about everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle. I hope everyone's keeping well. It seems like there's a bit of a positive increase, if you will, a positive intrusion into the COVID-19 intervention. So fingers crossed we can keep, striving on and get back to some sort of normality as soon as possible and resume proceedings for 2020. First things first, straight off the bat, the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge Academy. Yes, that's right. Fearless Training United. Jump into the links in the description below. It is the Netflix of fitness, simply. And we're just getting started. Get in there, guys. That's $10 a week. You can cancel and subscribe anytime, anywhere in the world, 365, 24/7 at your fingertips. And you can learn everything you need to know about training, nutrition, and lifestyle in an entertaining and intuitive way with all professional content, auditory, visual, and the like. Now, my guest today is Dr. James Hoffmann. And he is a coach for Renaissance Periodization, some of which I've had some guests on in the past. I've also spoke to his partner, Mel, and we get into some really interesting conversations. This one is an absolute belter. I had a great time. We really had a bit of a laugh on this one to escape reality. We talked a lot about his experience with athletes, strength and conditioning theory, practices, recovery, physiology, etc. There was a multitude of topics, and we go off on all different tangents. And quite frankly, I think you're going to love this one, especially if you just want to, as we talk about, escape reality just for a little bit. So I will, without further ado, hand it over to myself and James. And as always, guys, appreciate your support. Thanks for listening. Remember, just a quaint reminder, leave a rating and a review on iTunes or Spotify. Or if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe for more. We really appreciate it. Helps spread the word and get this quality knowledge out there, and also adds a bit of positivity to everyone's day. So without further ado, guys, enjoy this week's conversation between myself and Dr. James Hoffmann. All right, James, welcome to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast, my friend. Thank you for joining us today at this interesting time we all find ourselves in internationally. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. I'm doing really good. I'm staying healthy and well-stocked. Everything's mostly good with my wife and my fat cat Piccolo. So everything's good over here. How about yourself? Everything tame, well-supplied?
That's it. We're doing well in Australia. We've got that white gold. We're all about that life.
Yes,
We've got a lot of toilet roll here down under. If not,
that's the one thing I don't have. Damn it.
I'll send you some eucalyptus leaves. You'll be right. The koala bears won't be happy, but use a nice fresh scent.
It'll be refreshing.
I think that's kind of sets the tone for the podcast, guys. You're in for a good one here. You wanted some entertainment. You wanted to escape reality for a little bit. You're in the right place. James, give people a bit of a background, a bit of a synopsis for those who are unaware of who you are, what you do, and why.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Dr. James Hoffmann. I have a PhD in sport physiology. I work for Renaissance Periodization with Dr. Mike and all those goofy people. My background, I've been like a lifelong athlete. I've been involved in football, rugby, martial arts, basketball, wrestling, all sorts of stuff, combat sports. So I've always been interested in athletics. I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in biochemistry, and then kind of discovered that you could actually study exercise in uni, which was completely mind-blowing for me. I didn't even know that was available. So I ended up doing my master's degree in applied exercise physiology, and then I went on to get my PhD in sport physiology with Dr. Mike Stone and Dr. Bill Sands and a bunch of really cool people out there. And coincidentally, that's how I met Dr. Mike. For most people who know RP, they know Dr. Mike, and him and I linked up when we were in grad school, and we hit it off. And then I started working for RP, and I do a lot of coaching, and I help develop some of the templates and apps and books and audiobooks and all the stuff that we do over there. So that's kind of a snapshot of me. It's just a lot of sports, got my hands in a lot of the RP stuff, and I try to help do the best I can.
No, that's fantastic. And again, like a wide range of variety in all of those little, idiosyncrasies. I'm sure we'll dive in and unpack those as well. So I guess something that comes to mind for me in a natural flow is, what was your specific, because you're very passionate the way you speak, what was your initial sort of, I guess,
inflection point or even protagonist for getting in? Like you said before, you didn't even realize you could study the sports science. I know it was a bit of a thing for me as well. I'm like, man, you can do extra phys, like you can do this stuff. It's amazing. What was it that attracted you towards that? Did you like more of the approach in terms of the physiology for you, or was it more the fact that you could just study something that you just enjoyed growing up? Like perhaps you were a very movement-based kid. I know you do a lot of sport-specific stuff. Like what was the kind of instigator for all of that?
Yeah, so it was very much kind of towards the latter. I was, I did okay in school. I was doing biochemistry, and honestly, like I did great in like biology and stuff like that. I suck at chemistry. I was getting C's. I'm terrible. And for like a biochem major, like if you're getting C's, like it's not a great look. And I was kind of frustrated, feeling down. My girlfriend at the time was just like, "What are you doing? Why?" Because I was trying to go to pre-pharm. I wanted to go to pharmacy school, and my girlfriend was just like, "Why don't you do kinesiology?" And I was like, "Kinesia what? What are you talking about?" And she was like, "All the stuff that you do in your free time, you could do formally in school." And I was like, huh? Because I've been doing all the ACSM certifications, the NSCA certifications. I've just been looking into this stuff, looking into trying to like coach and be involved in rugby and try and get more into strength conditioning. And she was like, "Dude, you can just go do that. Why are you doing pharmacy?" And I was like, and it just, it's one of those, like, you go through the stages of change and you're like, "No, that's stupid. I'm not doing that." And then you kind of come around and you're like, okay. And then you go through all the emotional part. And then I was like, okay, I'm kind of late in the game. I'm already like about to graduate. So I got to finish out this degree, but I want to pursue exercise physiology and kind of go from there. And once I made the switch, it was just one of those things where it was just, for me, it was like constantly being in a flow state. Like I never had to think about it anymore. It was always just like, all of these things are interesting to me, at least to the point where I'm always engaged. Like obviously exercise physiology, like any other field, has plenty of boring stuff. But it was just one of those where it was like, chemistry was like pulling teeth. When I switched to exercise, it was just like, I was just soaking everything in. I started getting A's and everything. Didn't have to, like, homework was a breeze, projects were a breeze. And then I really found myself drawn to the sporting side of things because, having like a very specific aim or tangible goal, aside from just general fitness and health promotion, was much more appealing to me. And so I've always been involved in sports, and sports give you a very clear hierarchy of how to structure your life in order to get better at sport, right? There's every little aspect of sport you can look at and break it down and say, okay, I want to be better at rugby. Well, what does being better at rugby mean? Well, it means there's fitness components, there's skill components, there's tactics components. These are all things that I can somehow measure, assess, train for, reassess, all of which are leading to me getting better at something like rugby, for example. And so I really started getting more into the strength conditioning and sports science side. And my master's advisor just said, "Hey, I don't know if you know this, but there's a new program that's opening up in Tennessee," which for those of you who don't know, Tennessee is in the southeast of the United States. Let's just say it's generally a less than desirable place for most people to go, right? Most people are not eager to run out to Tennessee. Okay, let's just put that out there. And so he was like, "Hey, you should think about checking this out. It's got Mike Stone. He's this great sports science research guy and a bunch of other really cool people." And so I did, and I was like, wow, this is actually what I want to do. So I made the trip out to Tennessee. I ended up actually liking Tennessee. So I was talking shit for a second there. I actually love Tennessee. When I moved there, I was like, this is great. It's like where all the bogans go. And I just blended in seamlessly. I was like, this is wonderful. So I did my PhD out there. Got to work with a lot of cool teams, got to really get involved in the sports science side of things, which in the United States, we don't really have a huge scene for it. All of our sports scientists tend to go private sector, which is great because our sports teams tend to do really well because they'll hire sports scientists. And so we'll see like our NFL teams, our basketball teams, our college teams doing really well. But then there's also the downside of that is there's no education side. So you don't have sports scientists working in universities. So pickings are kind of slim. Yeah. So I was really fortunate to get to work with somebody like Stone and Sands and a bunch of other really great people like Brad DeWeese. And I graduated and I was teaching at Temple for a while. And it's just been like a whirlwind of sports ever since then. And I was really fortunate the last several years ago, I got to work on a project with the Tudor Bompa Institute. So if for your viewers who don't know, Bompa is kind of like the guy who coined periodization, the term, and made it a little bit more mainstream. Mm-hmm. And I got to work on a book with him. So I felt like super privileged. We did a textbook with him. And so I've just been involved in a lot of stuff, and I live, eat, and breathe sports. And that's the hard thing about right now. There's no sports on. Are you kidding me? There's nothing to watch. I've been watching like UFC Fight Pass all the time because they just replay like old events all day long. And Chael Sonnen had a grappling event on the other day, which was great because I turned it on. I was like, oh yes, sports. But I don't know about how you feel, but for me lately, just like not being able to watch sports it's killing me.
Yeah, I mean, look, here in Australia, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, it's a massive sporting nation. I mean, we're very fit, we're
Yes.
very active, and rugby's huge over here. Well, a lot of things are. I think it was cricket, etc. Even like for me, I'm a bit of a petrol head. I love my Formula One and that sort of. Saying that, they still got the virtual Formula One, so I mean, you're getting, like you said, you can kind of get a little bit of something. But yeah, if you're really into your sport at the minute, it's very crippling because there's not much, but at least we do have the luxury of being able to even go back and look at, say, those classic games or, matchups, whether it's fighting, whether it's, football, whatever it might be, where you can be like, let's reminisce on the good old times.
Yeah. Okay. Straight up. What the fuck is with AFL? I fucking love it. I can't get enough. It's like you took rugby and Mortal Kombat and put them together, and you have guys just like Liu Kang jumping each other across this huge field. Every time I've come to Australia, I try to go see an AFL match because I'm just like, what is going on with this? This is bananas. Are you into that at all or no?
I'll be honest, I'm not into it, but I have the same fascination with it as you. Like, for example, I'm like, I don't really know what's going on here, why they're tossing the ball back like that, why they're able to kick. But apparently, I'm one of those guys where there's a lot of sports where I'm like, I like playing it, but I would not watch it. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
for example, like golf. Like, I like golf, but like, it's fun. But watching it, it's like, I'd rather watch paint dry,
Yeah. It's a great way to like fall asleep. My dad used to watch golf and I would just go lay on the couch and be out.
And fishing is the same thing,
until
they get the big one on the line, and then it gets exciting for maybe a minute or so.
I don't understand why they televise fishing. Like, consolidate that shit down, right? They set out and then you just skip everything in the middle and then they hook something, right? That's it. Why do you have to watch them on the boat? And like, oh my God, painful.
Exactly. We've only lost like 2% of our viewers now. It's fine. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of big game fishers who are tuning in, but you never know. Hey, each to their own. Right? But I believe well, when I was in New Zealand, we came up with this. This is actually a funny little digression. Now we're going back. Some people are going to get this. Some people are not. We called it scrag, right? Scrag. Now I believe scrag was pretty much where we all kind of did this vicariously as a kid. Basically, whoever's got the ball dies, but also at the same time is winning. So if you've got the ball, you're winning, but you're also getting chased by every single person in the game. There's no boundaries, no rules. It's pretty much just basically smash the person with the ball, and if you've got the ball, you're winning. And there's no rules. It's barbarian like sport. So similar. But then apparently we played the Gaelic football. Now Gaelic football, originates.
Oh, that's a crazy one too.
Right. So I believe it's Irish, Welsh, or Welsh. Again, it's from that part of the world in Europe, and it's very similar to AFL, where you can hold it, you can bounce it, you can kick it, etc. There's different goals. There are obviously a lot of differences because I know there's like one or two viewers who are like, oh, but AFL apparently stems from that. And then they've recreated it where I think you've got like, again, 3 goals. Then again, you've got all these rules where you can kick it, run with it. You've got to bounce it so many steps. And again, I'm not well-versed in the arts of AFL. However, it is very entertaining to watch.
For sure. So in the United States, we had the same scrag game, but we called it something else. And let me just say that the name did not age very well. So we're going to skip over that, but we had the similar thing. Age did not treat that name well. AFL is incredible. And my favorite is when you see the guys jump up on the other guy's shoulders.
Oh, yeah.
And gank the ball. What's that called? Like specky or something?
Something. But like it does actually require a lot of like, again, from a sports science perspective, it requires a hell of a lot of athleticism and a lot of very dynamic motor skills and patterns. Because if you think about it, like, to be fair, they are very dual sort of athlete, undulations, because it's like you got the kicking part of the game, you got the throwing part of the game, you got the jumping part of the game, you got the start, the speed, the agility, the coordination, the stamina. Like, it really is a very, like, if you think about it, like, it's a well-rounded game. Like, you got to be pretty damn fit to play that. Like, they got kind of weird physiques too. Like, they're not like as jacked as rugby players. Well, not a lot of them, but then they're not like as lanky as or as tall as basketball players. So they kind of got this like melting pot. So I mean, from a periodization perspective, I imagine that would be quite an interesting one to train for.
Yeah, for sure. And AFL kind of is similar to rugby in a sense where it's a really good blend of fitness, skills, and tactics, right? So it's there's some sports which are really, really like fitness dominated, like, you know, track and field, for example, or some people call it athletics, where it's just like, okay, you got to be really powerful, fast, or strong, right? You have other sports which are skill dominant, and you have others which are tactics dominant. What you see with AFL and rugby is kind of a really nice blend of, you can be really successful if you hit any of those areas really well, or if you hit all of them really well. And so you kind of see like a really cool, this is where it gets fun for as like a coach and sports scientist, where it's like you have to not only look at the individuals, but you look at the team dynamics as well. And you might say like, okay, well, I can try and make all of my individuals as well-rounded as possible, or I can try and adapt a play style that plays to my team's strengths and minimizes weaknesses based on the individuals that I have. And how you cultivate those things, it's really fun and really, really challenging. And so those are the types of things that are really interesting to me. Like Mike and I do a webinar every week, and the majority of questions go to the tune of something like, how many sets should I train my biceps every week? And I'm like, oh, okay, you know, but after a while, it's just like biceps MRV. But like some of these like really difficult, challenging sport questions are really what kind of keep me sharp and get my wheels turning, where it's like, okay, how do you actually train for all these goddamn things at the same time? And it's definitely challenging and fun.
Well, it is true. And I think that is, again, from a programming perspective, it is more challenging to, you know, program and work with athletes, because generally, when we look at like sport specific movements, because there's a lot more things to factor in, where really first world problems, getting jacked, gains, everyone's worrying about it at the minute. If you understand, I think if this is the underlying thing for me, understanding some basic principles, you'll be fine. But everyone, again, is overcomplicating everything because of the media and this, that, and the other, etc. However, that said, I think it would be really great for the listeners and the audience to, if you could define the way you communicate it, periodization, simplify it, but then also perhaps then go into all of the so we'll start with a really zoomed out approach, and then we'll sort of go zoom in to each segment, and perhaps give some real life examples, like perhaps working with some rugby teams, which I know you've worked with, and perhaps go, cool, this is generally how I start, this is what this means, and then we go to this phase and this phase. Because I think what I've found personally with coaching people, a lot of clientele, a lot of athletes get confused, and I think it's our job as practitioners to not oversimplify, but simplify, and then communicate it in a way that's bespoke to that athlete. So some people, you know, they need a bit more information. Some people like the nitty gritty, get real sciencey. Some people just go, hey man, like I just need to kind of know what it is. And I think, like myself, before I learned all about, you know, periodization of these tools, a lot of them seem really intimidating. But when you break them down, you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's like really simple. Also, that's why we do that. That's why we do this. You know, and I think then if you understand something, it gives you a better ability to apply it, and also gives you purpose. So perhaps you could, I know that's a bit of a big question, but we've got time. So maybe you'd want to just digress and we can just slice it up into different pieces, starting with the big picture.
Yeah, for sure. So like I tend to have a little different view on periodization than what most of the kind of classical stuff tends to look at. So when you look at classical periodization, and this is what, when people are really critical of periodization, what they usually are critical of is mostly true, where they say you're just talking about phase potentiation, which is kind of like having a phasic structure and doing like kind of the old school 10s, 5s, 3s, 2s reps. They're like, that's periodization. That's part of it, right? But for me, periodization is basically the calculated systematic sequencing of your training variables from the areas of fitness, nutrition, psychology, and fitness, and that would also include like the skills and tactics, right? Sequencing of those variables in a logical way to the outcome goal, which is going to be improved sport performance at a programmed period of time, right? And so what that means is you generally will have some type of assessment period where you say, I have an athlete or athletes, I need to know where they're at. And how do you do that? Well, you perform something we like to call a needs analysis, which basically says, I'm going to break down the sport. I need to know everything I need to know about the sport. I'm going to break down my athlete, where they are in their career, in their training ages, what skills do they have, right? And I'm going to look at things like normative standards of fitness and performance. And so sometimes we'll call those KPIs, which are key performance indices. So we'll look at something like rugby and we'll say, what are the KPIs for rugby? What are the things that contribute the most to rugby success? What metrics can I take and say, I can use something to differentiate high performers and low performers. That's how powerful it is. And so we can look at things like, all right, for rugby sevens, I just did one of these, so it's off the top of my head. Rugby sevens, we can look at something like high intensity running. So we find people who can run fast and can do high intensity repeated efforts tend to outperform people who don't, right? We can look at things like strength, power, jumping, sprinting speeds. We can look at handling skills. We can look at errors during gameplay. We can look at all sorts of different things. And so we start breaking those down, and we go through the science, and we go through the literature, and we say, what are the things that contribute to success in the sport? And so we look at the areas of fitness, skills, tactics, and then we start breaking down our individual athletes, and we say, okay, here's some kind of values, rough values that our athletes should be at for their competition level. So you don't want to cross-contaminate, and you say, okay, what did the Olympic gold rugby sevens team do? I'm going to compare that to my like high school kids. Like, no, that doesn't work. You have to have like an ecologically valid group comparison. So you say, okay, I got like university level collegiate women, something like that, Division I, Division II. Can I find some standards that they use? And more often than not, you can, or you can find something very similar and you say, okay, here's the fitness measures that are important. Here's the skill measures that are important. Here's the tactics measures that are important. Where does my athlete fall within these things? And usually you can start categorizing them as either kind of competitive, above competitive, or below competitive. Periodization is the tool, right, where we address those things in a systematic way, where maybe we're cultivating a strength. Maybe we have an athlete who is really strong, and that strength is causing them to be disproportionately successful. And so we go with the coaches and we say, hey, this actually, instead of addressing some weaknesses, we find that actually addressing the strength and cultivating the strength is probably going to provide a better outcome than trying to bring up just a few kind of minor weaknesses. Or vice versa. We might say, this person sucks at ball handling so bad, they will never be a premier player until this is addressed. And so some of these other things, like they're pretty fit, their tactics are good, their skill base just kind of sucks. And so then we go through and we say, we're going to take all the variables from training, like whether it's volumes, intensities, frequencies, right? We might say, I'm going to actually put fitness on maintenance volume. I'm going to put their tactics on maintenance volume, but I'm going to ramp up their skill volume a lot so we can address this thing so that I have my athlete in the state of preparedness that I want for these predetermined competitions. That's what periodization is to me. And then Bampa's been good about pushing this more recently, where he said, most people just think of the X's and O's, where it's like, okay, what exercises am I doing? What volumes and intensities am I doing? Stuff like that. And that's part of it too. Mm-hmm. But we also have to think about the nutritional preparation. So like, how are we changing the athlete's lifestyle and behaviors with nutrition to support these goals, training goals? And then also, like, there are psychological preparedness. There are psychological strategies that we can use throughout a training plan, which are going to be different depending on what the athlete is actually doing at any given time. So I like to think of periodization, and Bampa coined this term, integrated periodization, meaning you have all the fitness stuff, certainly, and that's what most people are focused on, but you're also thinking about nutrition and psychology and putting all those things together, because we know that there's intersectionality between all of those things. It's kind of hard to look at training and not talk about nutrition or not talk about psychological preparation. So we want to start thinking about all of those things. So periodization is the process in which you just have an athlete, you assess them, you look at what you need to do, and you look at the time that it needs to get done in, and you systematically sequence their training variables to give you the best outcome that you can at the best time, at the predetermined times that you want.
No, well summed up, and thank you for the in-depth answer, James. That's really good. And you're right, they're all interrelating factors, aren't they? I think, like you rightly said, you can't really not acknowledge, the nutritional interventions, even the lifestyle interventions. I think, again, that's something that my listeners are very aware of. I always say, I believe that lifestyle is almost however you want to categorize that, but, it's the stuff away from generally, is nutrition impacted, but the training itself. And, I always say that if you don't even acknowledge that, that has a massive sort of, factor and impact on, how well the athlete does eat and, can perform in training, because of all those variables that happen at home or outside of the training facility, wherever that might be. And even the cultural aspects as well, which is really interesting. So sort of to springboard through that then, what are some of the main challenges, apart from, perhaps managing variables? That might be one of them by the sounds of it, within periodization, when you have got a group of athletes or a team, or whether it is an individual. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, so this is a good one. And actually, I'm going to tie it into the last point that you just made on lifestyle. So one of the big challenges is realizing that all athletes are human beings, and we all suck, and we're all terrible. One of the big things that was like a giant epiphany for me was when I moved to Tennessee and I was working with all these Division I teams. I was like, holy shit, I'm going to be a strength coach for Division I athletes. And you realize that Division I athletes are the same pieces of shit that everyone else are. They're just better, right? That's the reality. So humans are like inherently flawed. And like one of the things you have to kind of instill, and this is something like whether you're a sporting athlete or somebody who just wants to be jacked and fit, or someone who's just trying to be maybe less of a piece of shit, right? All these people, same idea, right? If you want to be better, there are trade-offs that you have to make. And many of them come in the form of your lifestyle, which is what you were just talking about a second ago. And I'm glad you brought that up. And that's probably the biggest thing, whether it's an RP client or an athlete or somebody I'm just helping out on the side, like a friend. One of the things that's very difficult to instill in people is this idea that, okay, you have something that you want. In order to make that happen, you're going to have to give some things up, right? If you want to be a world champion, national champion, Olympic caliber person, the lifestyle that you lead is going to be extremely regimented. There's going to be very little margins of error, and your autonomy is largely going to be taken away. And it's going to be dictated by other people saying, you need to do this training at this time, eat this food, rest at this time, and you have to just fucking do it, right? No excuses. But most people don't want to be that. Most people might say that they want to be that, but the reality is that they actually don't want to make the trade-offs in order to get there once they realize what those trade-offs are. Correct. So the idea of trade-offs, right, is really important for people to understand, and especially for, you know, I like to talk about athletes, but most people don't want to be world champions. So we kind of then back off and say, okay, you maybe are a competitive recreational person. Maybe you're like playing a men's league and you want to do really well in your men or women's league or something like that. And that's fine, right? And then we start to realize like, okay, we can loosen up on some of these things. And so if you want to go out and have a pizza with your mates, maybe have a few beers, you know, on Saturday night, is that going to impact your body composition goals in some way? Yeah, almost certainly. And I get this all the time with my RP clients where they'll message me and I'll be like, hey, what's your body weight today? And they're like, oh, I had a pizza, cry face, da, 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 da. And I'm like, dude, was it awesome? Did you enjoy the pizza? Did you have a good time with your friends? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, did you regret doing it? They're like, well, I had a great time with my friends, and I know that like my body weight's a little goofed up today. And you go, that's it, high five, that's it. You make peace with that. And you say, I made a little bit of a trade-off. I want that lifestyle where I can still have some fun with my friends, still enjoy some treats every now and again. It set me back a little bit, but guess what? I don't have to be a perfect person to make some changes in my body composition. It's a trade-off, right? And I think getting that idea across to clients, athletes, whomever is one of the hardest things in both directions, where in some directions you're saying, hey, it's okay, you can ease up, just know that you won't be making as much progress. Or in the other direction, it's like, hey, you need to get strict here or you're not going to be making any progress, right? And so I think that idea is one that I don't want to say I struggle with, but it's definitely like one of the first big hurdles that you have to cross with anybody that's getting serious.
Yeah, no, some great points there as well. And you're right. I like how you humanize that as well. And you sort of just no nonsense about it. And you're right. It is like we're all flawed and that's okay. You know, that is okay.
Yes.
It's not, I think with these rosy glasses and lenses that we often get to see the world through, especially with, certain social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and everyone's like, oh, living the perfect life. But it's like, no, we've all got problems, It's like rich people got rich people problems, poor people got poor people problems, fit people got fit people. Like we've all got problems. You just want, to quote Mark Manson in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, is we just want, right. Yeah, right. We just want better problems. But it's true. And I think once you acknowledge that and understand that, in real life, things are just shit. Like for everybody, everyone goes through shit. Everyone has good, everyone has bad, and that's the way it is. And I think putting that into perspective is really important. So I admire the way you did that. Very, very good indeed. And again, this is the gray area. It's always the lifestyle. Everyone's always focused on these, points like the training and the nutrition. I'm like, that's all well and good, but I'm like, what about this kind of big, massive elephant in the room here, which is you got a family. You might have some injuries. You might be location dependency, whatever it is. You might be on medication. It's like that. Surely we need to acknowledge. We can't pretend that doesn't exist, especially if we want real long-term tangible results. So I got to say, I think that's definitely important, but continue.
No, just to bolster your point. A lot of the times when I give our recovery talk and we talk about the recovery principles and stuff, one of the things that I usually remark on is, okay, so if you are somebody who is thinking about recovery strategies, one of the big things that you can do for yourself is having planned relaxation time. And I kind of make like a half joke, half serious comment, which is like usually something like, if you are somebody who is aspiring to be the greatest athlete that you can be, you should basically be relaxing the entirety of the day that you are not training. Mm-hmm. And then people in the audience usually look at me like, are you fucking insane? What are you talking about? Right? And I'm like, yes, exactly. Who can do that? The only people who can do that are professional athletes, people who are getting paid to lift, train, and eat for their sport. Everyone else has a family, they have jobs, they have other obligations, they have, all sorts of stuff that they have to manage throughout the day. And then you get to back to that idea of compromise, which is like, okay, I can't relax all day. So that means I'm probably not going to be the best athlete in the world. But if I want to be a little bit better athlete, can I do something tangible? Can I relax for 30 minutes today? Can I just set aside some time where I'm going to turn my phone off? I'm not going to answer any emails, no group text. I fucking hate group text, by the way. That stresses me out so bad. None of that. I'm just going to do whatever it is that I want. No kids. I'm just going to maybe read a book. I'm going to do a hobby, something that I want to do, even if it's doing fucking nothing, even if it's just watching Netflix or playing Xbox, whatever it is. That's something that's tangible and something that you can work on and change your behaviors. By the way, I just picked up Doom Eternal. I don't know if you're a video gamer. Not stress-free. It's the least stress-free game I've ever played. I finished the game sweating and yelling at people. I'll have my buddy I'll get on the headset and he'll be like, "Hey mate, what's going on?" And I'll be like, "I'm playing Doom," like screaming at him. So if you're trying to relax, Doom Eternal, not recommended, but it is a fun game.
Yeah, no, I heard a couple of reviews on that. I'm actually, I was fairly into it back in the day. I never considered myself the connoisseur of gaming. I'd be lying. But I definitely had my days where I was on there. Probably not a bad thing that I didn't get too into it, because I find I was one of those, I've got an addictive personality where I just all or nothing. And then I got to the age where, because when I was young, my mum and dad were like, "Okay, you can go on it for an hour," and this, that, and the other. And, I remember my other mates were like, just played on it all day, every day. But then I look at what skills I've developed versus perhaps people who have just maybe done too much gaming. And, you think, "Oh, man, you can really get sucked in." And I used to get angry too. Like, it G's you up, but you don't understand it. But I think there are benefits when you can detach yourself from the outcome, depending on the game, depending on who you are. I remember playing it years on, being older and more mature and had a lot more life experience. And I was like, "Oh, this is a really nice outlet." Like, and I could completely just be like, "Cool, I've had, an hour or whatever. And I just turned it off and I was fine with it." Whereas a kid was like, "No, I'm just going to do one more level. I'm just going to beat this boss. I'm just going to do this." But yeah, Doom is apparently, the violence is, very strategic. I was listening to that Joe Rogan podcast where he was talking to the creator, and he was like, "It's violent, but the way we do it, and the words we use, it's like it doesn't actually because it's like cartoonized. Apparently, it's not like interrelated into real life. So it's like people are not going to out and stab people." But I'm like, okay, well,
yeah, I saw that too, and I didn't quite agree. What I would say is like I saw what you're talking about. When I'm playing it, it's so violent that it just comes full circle where you're just like, "Oh, this is normal. This is fine." Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's like getting violent, really violent. "Oh my God, I can't believe this is so violent." And then it's just, you've already come back to the beginning where you're just like, "Oh no, this is whatever." You're just like, "I just ripped this person apart with my hands. This is normal. This is fine."
Yeah, video games, they're getting real good. And I think now more than ever, screen time is up. So a lot of people are on that, and the gamers are like, "Whoo," which is really cool.
I think gaming is good in a sense where you can kind of, like you said, you kind of can detach for a little while where you can get like into a really good flow state where something is challenging you, you're engaged, and you're putting a lot of your other stressors kind of behind you for a little while, which sometimes can be hard. Like, I work from home, so sometimes like not being on the computer or looking at emails frantically is difficult. I have to actually like make time to say, "No, you can't do that. You have to chill out for a little while." And sometimes games are a good way to do that. But like you said, you can also go in the rabbit hole, and then you've been playing for 8 hours. You look at the clock and you're like, "Oh my God, the day's fucking over. I haven't done anything except play this game." So you got to strike a good balance there.
Yeah, correct. And I think that's the challenge with that one, because you're right. It's a really good way because you're engaged enough, and because of the technology, like, you really are now. Like, man, if you've got a really good setup, you can be very much in that game, like, VR or not. Like, you're there, you got the surround sound, you got the headset, you got the big screen, you got the curtains on, like, you can be in that world. And I found myself, you almost get like in a bit of it like a daydream almost sometimes. And like you said, you look up and it's like, "Man, I've not eaten any food and I need to go to the toilet real bad. And it's 8 p.m. Which is interesting. A point before I go back to another really good point that you made that I want to sort of bring back up and regurgitate is, I remember my dad saying, I used to really like, for me, Assassin's Creed was one of my favorites. I was a PlayStation man. Loved Assassin's Creed. I was that weird guy who like walk around the streets, like read all the little the history of, Michelangelo and all. I'm like, I love that stuff, man. I liked hand-to-hand combat. It's really, for me, it's more engaging. It's more raw. You get the pleasure of it rather than just shooting someone. I'm like, come on, man. got to assassinate them. And then Grand Theft Auto. But I remember, sorry, not Grand Theft. Grand Theft Auto. Yeah, Grand Theft Auto, a legendary game. You know, it's almost like, you know, you can be a real character. You can do things that you wouldn't normally do in real life. You know, steal a car, get in trouble, get the army onto you. You know, whatever it is.
Yes.
And you could even, by the end of it, you know, you'd feed the person. You have to feed the person. You go to the gym and get jacked. And then I remember my dad said something one day that really stuck me. And he goes, because I was explaining, I said, this is the way the game works. And he goes, if you think about this one, he goes, that is you in real life. He goes, you are that character. He says, so imagine that you are the character of which you've created in the wrestling game, in the Grand Theft Auto, in Assassin, whatever it is. And he goes, and then imagine like leveling up in real life. And it kind of struck me. I was like, huh. He's like, because he goes, what have you achieved when you finished that game? He was always a bit high. He's like, what have you achieved? And I'm like, well, I got to level this and then I got this. He's like, yeah, but he's like, how does that transfer to the real world? I'm like, well, a bit of coordination skills and all this. And he's like, yeah. He's like, but think about it. He's like, I'm not being mean. And it got me thinking though. And the point is, he's right. If you treat life like a game, because it's a game, right? In many respects. Yeah. You can actually do those things in real life and level up and, you know, get better clothing and get more jacked and eat better and get a better job and hopefully not do the bad things in the game because there are repercussions for that. You know, don't go around killing people or jacking cars. They're not good, guys. Not good. Disclaimer. All right. But you sort of get a lot more fulfillment. And that's when I started switching up and going, hang on, he's probably right. Like I'm not getting, you know, where I want to be in life. And I'm always, you know, I don't feel good when I finish sometimes. I'm like, I want to be my character. I want to be the jack guy that's on the game. I want to be the, you know, the person that's on the game who's popular. I was like, man, I want to do that in real life. And that kind of was a big thing that struck with me. But to segue back to, no, you go on first, because I want to go back to another point.
Oh, no, I was totally with you. And I've been thinking about what that kind of same notion. And I kind of came to the same epiphany with a slightly different phrasing, which was basically thinking about like how to live the hero's journey of your life. And that's something that's been resonating with me more and more lately, where it's like, okay, if I'm going to look back at my life, am I going to think about all the things that I've done and thought that like I did something great, you know, that would I want to relive that life again? And would I imagine myself accomplishing something large throughout my lifetime? So I'm with you. It's a way of reframing the way you think. Like, can you level up in real life? Can you live the hero's journey of your life? And instead of just being complacent with the day-to-day kind of bullshit that you normally do.
100%. That's some good verbiage. I know a friend of mine, he's a psychologist. He talks about like going on the hero's journey, because that is a thing, you know, like as in like going within, you know, fixing those like perhaps deep underlying issues and then like being the champion of your own reality. And I think that's really well put. And it is true. Like people might see that as a theme, but it is actually a thing as well. And I think sometimes that can help people, because if you make things into a game, oftentimes that will make you more adherent. And it's all about reframing and having perspective and context, I think. And something that you said before about, I want to go back and highlight for the listeners and the audience is, the more skilled and specific you get at something, the more the needle moves into the less room for error, and all of the other things in life have to give, right? So it's like, you say you've got, for example, one element, like say you got frequency, volume, intensity. Let's take those three variables. Like you can't just jack them all up. Like if you go from one, the other two have got to sort of, you know, fall down. And it's the same with anything in life. It's equilibrium, right? It's like what goes up must comes down, and all these laws,
yes.
And, you know, like it's hidden. It's a hidden underlying principle that you can't get away with. And I remember, you remind me, it's a really good story. My first job was a lifeguard in New Zealand. I was an indoor lifeguard. I didn't want to work in a supermarket, and something different. Anyway, I got this job. I was 16, and we had a lot of high-level swimmers at this event center, as it were. So this event center had a gym. It had a proper basketball gymnasium, which they used for all the, you know, the top the basketball games and netball, etc. And then we had the swimming pools and had all the sort of like elite swimmers coming up. I remember one of the swim teachers, he was from Zimbabwe, interesting cultured man. I remember asking him one day, I used to watch, because obviously you're a lifeguard, there's a lot going on, but then there's also a lot not going on. And I used to watch these swimmers come in. They were there, you know, 3 times a day. There was hours, and I just thought, oh, the monotony. I mean, we've all done swimming as a kid, or you've tried it, and I just thought, oh man, this is boring as shit. And I just admired these guys. I'm like, man, like that is discipline. I remember speaking to, you know, the swim coach at the time, and I said, you know, well, what's the story here? Like, you know, I was sort of starting. I was interested in sport, but I'd not started studying it yet. I was doing a little bit of extra at school, and he said, you know, these swimmers, he goes, man, they're here. He goes, as they become more, if they want to become professional, like really elite, he goes, they'll spend more time in the water than they will out the water. And I said, that's kind of fucked, like, especially when you look at adaptation. And he goes, yeah. And he used to have this funny accent. He goes, yeah, mate. He goes, they're fucking useless, man. He goes, they're useless. They go, they can't do shit. They can't cook. He goes, they're fucking useless, man. He goes, they're in the water. He goes, they're not good. He goes, they're good at swimming, but nothing else. And I remember him putting it just like you did. But the thing is, as I studied, as I educated, I understood, like, he had a very good point. If you're going to be a lead at something, it is everything you do just for this one skill or this one like predetermined event or whatever it is, whether that's swimming 100 meters, whether that's playing a football game for 90 minutes. Like, if you want to be at the top of the game, you get so specific. And then on the opposite side of that, you know, for people who are just, you know, general population or whatever that means, you know, I don't really like that term, but you know, for someone who's got a family and other commitments, like, yeah, you can still get good, but if you want to get really good, there's this point where it's like, oh, I have to make these sacrifices, like you said before. And I think people don't realize, like, hey, you might see some of the glory from, you know, these adaptations and this stimulus and years of hard work, but you have not truly seen what has gone into that. So sometimes it's the whole 80-20 rule. Maybe 20% gets you 80%, 20% of the job, 20% of the knowledge is 80% of the job, or the 20% gets you 80% of the results. That's for most people. I think it's the same with language. I think it's like, to learn a language, 80% good, you know, takes you a certain amount of time. And then it's like, to get to 100%, it's like 10 times that amount to get that last, 20%. So I think oftentimes, even living with that balance, or going, well, are you happy with 80%? Are you happy to be not completely shredded, but still walk around looking good? Because that's obviously more maintainable in many ways. Or are you happy to get to this level, but still have the balance? Because at the end of the day, like you said, people want to eat the proverbial pizza. I don't know about you, but I like pizza and ice cream. And I think that's something that I'm super passionate about, by saying, hey guys, look, you can have your cake and eat it too, literally. Like, it's better to be perhaps not 100% like peak performance, but still be pretty damn there and still be able to have that other stuff too. But yeah, give me your thoughts on that, because I think I just wanted to kind of bring that point back up, because I think it's really, really overlooked and people are not aware. And like you said, when they actually take a peek inside of, Alice in Wonderland, they actually go, oh shit. And you're like, yeah, man, this is all, like, you got to go there.
Yeah. So I had kind of two big thoughts on that. The first one's pretty straightforward. And this is something that I tell my clients all the time. And there's no right or wrong answer. When you're dealing with an individual, you have to kind of make it clear, once you've made this idea of trade-offs, like, only you can find the right balance between your body composition goals or sport performance goals and the lifestyle that you want to live. I can't tell you what that is. I can tell you what it's going to require if you shift the dial up or shift the dial down, right? But only you can figure out what is the sweet spot in terms of how much progress you're making towards the goals that you have and the lifestyle that you want to live. A coach can't tell you what that is. A coach can only tell you what's required to get there. And so Mike and I are really big on this. And so we were writing the recovery book many, many years ago. And we had this thing that we have been working on, and we called it the volume landmarks, which is basically taking the literature on dose response of training, which is like all the mathy stuff. It's like how much training gets you this much outcome kind of stuff. And so we ended up writing this like huge amount in the recovery book about these volume landmarks. And we ended up just saying, you know what, let's just make this its own book because it's that important. And the volume landmarks is all about, like, how do you dose these things out in such a way where you can make progress in some things, make maybe a little bit progress in other things, or make no progress but not decondition in other things, right? And so life and training for sport is kind of this whole idea of this volume landmarks, where some things you're training really hard, some things maybe you're training a little bit less hard, and then some things you're just doing enough to not get worse at. And it's always a really hard balance to strike. And when you're dealing with elite athletics, right, the margin of errors are so low, you get into situations where you got guys like those guys in the water. How much time do you think they actually spent doing stuff like strength training? Well, probably enough strength training so that they didn't lose any muscle mass, and they could spend as much time humanly possible doing either, live swimming or swimming drills or any of the swimming stuff that they had to do. The same idea applies there, right? And this is something that I'm working on right now. I have a book in the works that I'm working with my colleague, Dr. Reed, and Chad Wesley Smith on, where we're taking the same idea of dose response and the volume landmarks that we did for fitness. And we're saying, you know what, you can take this idea of dosing fitness, you can also apply it to skills and tactics in sport. And that's what that's kind of what a sports scientist does. And we just really hadn't had the terms to kind of put it together yet. So I'm really excited about that project. and hopefully I have no idea when it's going to come out, but it's just been something on my mind where it's like, okay, you have an athlete, they need to work on these 3 fitness things, this one skill thing, and then this one tactics thing. How do I make sure that all the other things don't get worse? Okay, well, I have to have them do some amount of training, right, to make them not get worse, but I want to free up resources to do other things. And it ends up being like this big, it ends up having so many parallels to life where it's like, you can't get better at everything at the same time. You have to say, I'm really focused on something right now, and other things, you have to dial it down and say, okay, I'm going to do enough of that not to get worse, so I can free up resources and availability to do other things that really matter to me. And it ends up being this like big kind of analogy to a lot of life circumstances, which I think ends up being really cool.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's where like that keyword balance comes into place, right? Because it's very much like spinning plates. Like, you know what, like, yeah, some are going to slow down at some point, but you just got to make sure they don't all drop on the floor, you know, while certain plates, you know, being in this scenario might be like, okay, cool, it's speed. Or like you said before, you're shithouse at skill. Okay, that's going to be the plate we're going to spin the fastest for a while. But you can't have all of them spinning fast at the same time. There will be certain periods where some will have to, like you said, you got to go on the back burner. But as you rightly said, the challenge is being able to not regress in those movements or those skill sets to be able to go, right, well, and again, this is where this periodization, this organization comes in, this strategy. This is why you have these systems, these processes to be able to go, right, well, we can do this. Now we've identified, like you said, where this specific athlete or these group of people or whatever it is, you know, needs to be improved. But at the same time, we also have strategies to be able to not regress in other areas so that when we do put all the building blocks back together again, we have, you know, a more enhanced whole, if you like, which I think is, again, the challenge of all this. Perhaps because I know some of the listeners will be familiar with, you know, your work and also, you know, what you do with RP Strength and Dr. Mike in terms of, you know, the volume landmarks. They're quite, for people who know, they're quite a popular sort of set of protocols, I guess, systems, practices. Do you perhaps want to highlight a couple of those things? And the reason why I'm bringing this up, specifically why we're here, is because there's a lot of people at the minute who are like, I'm going to lose my gains. I'm going to lose all the muscle. Not true. So let's say we've got beginners, intermediates, and athletes, right? If we look at progression, if we look at maintaining muscle mass, if we look at growing muscle mass, perhaps can you give us some landmarks and tie those in terms of, like, you know, MRV, things like that, like what based on what you know with the studies, you know, what's the minimum to stimulate muscle, the minimum to maintain muscle, you know, the minimum maximum maybe to grow muscle, and, you know, kind of context it into this situation right now where people who might have nothing and doing body weight, all the way to people who are just like, yeah, I got a couple of water jugs, all the way to people like some of us ourselves who've actually got home gym setups, and perhaps maybe just dispelling a couple of those myths and I think a lot of fears that people are having at the minute, where they think they're all of a sudden just going to vanish into thin air, even though nutrition really should still be very much the same, and rest, which are the biggest, in my opinion, contributing factors in terms of, you know, when you look at those lifestyle factors rather than the actual stimulus of training itself.
Yeah, sure. So there's a ton of stuff to unpack there. So I'm going to try and avoid some of the more dry volume landmark stuff, which is just boring and mathy, but some good news, right? So first off, the maintenance volume is the amount of training you need to do to not decondition. And you could look at the cardiovascular characteristics, you could look at your skills and tactics, but most people are looking at their muscle mass right now. They're thinking, how do I not lose muscle mass during this time? And what we have found is that every time we do investigations into the maintenance volume, it just keeps getting lower. We haven't actually figured out the bottom end, really, of where the maintenance volume to maintain your muscle mass is. And so usually we look at something like how many sets per week per muscle group does it require you to not lose muscle, right? And what we're finding is that threshold just keeps getting pushed lower and lower and lower. And it might even be so low that it's like on not even a weekly scale. It might be like a 2-week scale or like a 9-day scale, where it might be like, you might only need to do like 4 sets every 9 days to not actually lose muscle. And what's also very cool, aside from it being very low, is that even if you do decondition and you lose muscle specifically, once you start training normally and eating normally again, what we see is that almost always comes back immediately. So your body, like once you've actually accrued muscle and it's become part of you for a significant amount of time, if you lose it, your body will bring it back as soon as it can, as soon as energy conditions are good and training stimulus is good. So that's really good news. So even if you do a shit job during this time and you lose a little bit of muscle, once you get back to the gym, dude, it's going to come back. So if you're worried about losing muscle, keep in mind the maintenance volume to not decondition is very low. And even if you do decondition, you're going to gain it back. So on the other hand, for those people who are trying to maybe gain muscle, what that means is we have to hit what we call the minimum effective volume, which is there's some amount of training that you need to do that's above maintaining. Like there's some jump you have to make to actually start gaining fitness or gaining muscle. So in this case, we call that the minimum effective volume. Those numbers are also pretty low. And so for the most part, we actually have a really great thing on our website. If you just type in hypertrophy, RP Hypertrophy Central Hub into Google, we have a huge thing that has every single muscle group, and we give volume landmarks recommendations for all of those things. So if you ever want a good place to start, that's a good place. Most of them, the minimum effective volume is usually something to the tune of 4 to maybe 8 sets per week, where you start to see a pretty robust growth stimulus. Now, that's assuming that you're going to like a Globo gym and using pretty stimulative exercises, right? If what we're finding now is that people are kind of stuck at home, maybe doing a little bit more metabolite training, maybe do some more body weight training, or improvising with, household items, which is perfectly fine. What we would usually say is you're probably going to have to scoot those recommendations up just a bit, right? So instead of saying my normal deltoids MEV, which I would normally be 6, I would have to do 6 sets a week to start seeing some growth or some performance improvements. Maybe now it's like 8 or 9 because I'm not doing the same overhead pressing or upright rows. Now I'm doing like milk carton lateral raises or something instead. So I might scoot those up a little bit, right? And that's perfectly fine. So take what you normally would do for a good workout. And if you're doing stuff like body weight stuff at home or just kind of improvise stuff at home, just do a little bit more. Same thing goes for frequency. Normally we'd say, most muscle groups somewhere between 2 and 4 times a week. If you're doing less stimulative, like if you're not doing barbell squats for sets of 8 and you're just doing like lunges and stuff around the house, maybe you can train quads 1 extra time per week than you normally would do, right? Same idea there. So you make it a little bit harder, maybe a little bit more frequency, a little bit more sets than you normally do, but nothing crazy, right? We're not saying double or triple. We're saying maybe add 2 sets to what you normally did, maybe add a day. Something like that. No big deal. What we are telling people too is it might not be in your absolute best interest to really try and push the upper thresholds of training, like your MRVs, like we call that your maximum recoverable volume, which is all the training that you can do before you start to either plateau or even start going down. Might not be in your best interest, might be in your best interest to kind of just avoid that a little bit and stay just a little underneath. So having really, really hard stimulative training that gets you sweating, gets your heart pumping, leaves you sore, leaves you unable to like maybe do things like sit on the toilet for a day, that's all good. But not to the point where you are like necessarily systemically overreaching, meaning where you're so fatigued that everything is starting to suffer, which is normally what you would see at the end of a normal training meso, and then you would deload and you'd feel refreshed and then you get back to it. So maybe stay just a little bit below that. What we have been also telling people is, a really good goal for this time, you can gain muscle if you're kind of beginner to early intermediate. If you're like a late intermediate to an advanced person and you're stuck with doing at-home workouts, it's probably not a good bang for your buck to try and gain muscle right now. What's probably a better strategy is just to try and maintain the muscle that you have and not get super Jabba fat, right? That's probably a very good goal. You could probably also cut, like if your situation is good and you have enough stuff at home to get a good pump, get some good lifts in, you could probably cut and just maintain your muscle while you cut down, or you can just do straight maintenance, which is maintenance body comp, maintenance training. Those are all really good options. But for advanced people trying to get up to like a massing strategy at this point is probably not in your best interest. I would say beginners, novice people, if you want to try and gain muscle at this time, it's definitely doable. Intermediates, it's going to be like a lot of effort and not a lot of output, unfortunately. And then for advanced, the trade-off is just really shitty. So for a lot of people, we're saying, just do maintenance training for now until this blows over. You'll be really sensitive to training because your training volumes are so low. You'll be really sensitive when you get back to training, and you only need to do like 2 or 3 sets of barbell bench press to blow your chest up when you get back to it. And that's kind of the other side of the story is once you get back to it, once all this stuff calms down, you get to go back to the gym, ease into it. You're not going to be able to do what you did before. And so that we have the opposite problem now where we say, now you're really sensitive to doing hard training, shift those volume landmarks down, right? So normally you would do 6 sets, go down to 2 sets, see how that goes. You can always go up. The thing is, it's hard to go down once you start overreaching, right? Once you present a really, really challenging stimulus, it's hard to back off in terms of having productive training or not getting injured. It's really easy to start light and ramp your way back up, because what most people are going to do is they're going to get into an okay groove with the home training, but once the gyms open up, they're going to be like, fuck yeah, I'm going to the gym, and they're going to try and do 4 sets of whatever and just be completely annihilated for the next week, and then be overreached for the next several weeks and just be in this perpetual cycle of under recovered from being too ambitious.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the summary and simplification, because I know, like you said, that can be very complex and you could really go into the nuts and bolts there, but I think that's good because it gives some context. It is obviously very individualized as well, but you've segregated that into, different categories, and I think people will be able to go, cool, that's enough. I understand that, and then they can actually apply that, which is really good. So thank you. Some good points I kind of want to highlight a little bit more is the last point. Oh yeah. Now this is going to be, I believe, a really big topic because, and I've already started setting expectations of my clients now. Because, a lot of them were first all worried because they're like, oh, I was making such good progress, especially, for people who are quite new because, they were really on the run. They were getting things right. When things really slide into place and you're a beginner and it's just like, oh, beginner gains, baby, money on the bank, love it.
Yeah.
Dropping body fat and all this and everything's just working. They're just feeling great. They're recomp. They're seeing muscle in place that never knew existed. They're like strong. Anyway, and I'm like, well, but now they're like, after a few weeks, they're like, oh, I'm still making progress. I'm like, yep. Exactly, because with basic principles. But I've also said, look, when we go back to the gym, it's going to be a party. Everyone's going to be in there. It's going to be great. Vibe's going to be good. The industry's going to be pumping. There's going to be a lot of positives. I said, but there's going to be this big underlying fuckery of people going in and just absolutely not understanding anything to do with this intensity, this volume and the recovery. And just, even if they think, 3 sets, I'm like, you will train hard. The gym is specifically designed to, destroy muscle, to stimulate it. It's great. It's perfect for that. It's bespoke to it. So people are going to go in, they're going to be too overzealous. And, and I think we're going to see a lot of stories where unfortunately people are going to be then out of the gym within the week because they've just gone too hard too soon. And I said to the guy, I said, look, when we go back in, they're like, oh, smash it. I'm like, no. I'm like, we're going to be doing like 1 to 2 sets. I'm like, what? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, we're not even going to go to deload volume. We're going to go to like fucking preschool volume. Like, we're just going to go in there. We're just going to move. We're just going to split it up. We're going to take it real easy. We're just going to feel the weight again. We're just going to get used to the movements. We're just going to go like, we're going to keep the intensity really low, and we're just going to enjoy the environment, and then we're going to slowly build it up. And before you know it, we'll be back. We'll be better. All that muscle, if we have lost any, will come back. Probably not for my beginners. It's more the advanced guys. And then we can continue. I said, because otherwise you're going to do the very thing, that it is kind of opposite to your goal. You're going to go in, then you're going to be out of the gym again because you'll be so sore. You're going to even, worse, overreach and get injured. And then you're not even going to be able to train, which defeats the purpose. So I said, we're going to be smarter. We're going to go in. People are taking it a bit easy, aren't you, pal? It's like, yeah, but we're longevity. We're in this for the long run. So I think that is a really valid point. So for everyone listening, write that shit down, put it in your calendar, keep it in mind. It's not going anywhere. You will be fine. And I think the second point is, I think people, they think that they lose muscle mass, but a lot of the time, if they're not able to actually stimulate their muscle with whatever they've got in their environment, it's not the muscle that they're losing. It's just the glycogen generally stored in the muscle that, that gives you that nice fullness, etc. And with the water and the nutrition, etc. But a lot of the time, once you start putting those nutrients back in, sure enough, bang. I don't think, as you said, people just think that muscle just wastes away a lot faster than it actually does. And I think, no, if you've earned that muscle, like you said, and obviously I think more for, I don't know if there's a massive discrepancy, but I believe based on my knowledge for natural athletes, it's a little easier to retain as well, especially if you've got adequate amounts of, protein and nutrients coming in. You might look a little flat depending on what you're doing, but it's not muscle. A lot of that, as you said, will just return. So, I mean, I'll let you jump in now if you want to add on to any of those points.
Yeah. And so a lot of it too is, it's not even, glycogen is definitely part of it, but a lot of it too is just like when you do hypertrophy training, your body actually carries around a bit of a perma pump a little bit more often. So you're literally just more swollen all the time in your muscles that are being trained. So that just you just shrink down a little bit because you lose some of that pump, and you might see the weight go down. If you're like an average sized man, your weight might go down 5 or 10 pounds. And you might be like, oh my God, I'm losing all this weight. It's like, not really. You're just losing body water. And like, as soon as you start getting pumped up again, like with your normal workouts and eating normally, like that weight will come right back on and you'll look the way you did before. So yeah, the idea is like for your muscle mass, man, a very little goes a long way. There are other things that are worth talking about in terms of deconditioning, like your aerobic fitness is something that will decondition much more quickly, much more readily if you don't do something. Your sports skills, your sharpness in your sport, your ability to read, react, and make decisions in a sport context, it's going to decondition immediately. So that might sound silly, but even for like if you have CrossFit athletes, if you're not able to retain some of the skills of your CrossFit movements, like your weightlifting movements, like handstand push-ups, ring dips, stuff like that, like if you just aren't doing it, you will start deconditioning them almost immediately. Aerobic fitness, same thing. Like within a week or two, if you're not doing some kind of cardiovascularly stimulative exercise, it's going to start deconditioning. So I think for people who are involved in other sports and activities, you want to be thinking about some of the other areas of fitness and then your sport skills and tactics more than worrying about your muscle mass. Because your muscle mass, as long as you're not a total piece of shit, you will maintain most of that muscle mass as long as you do something. Like you can do. The maintenance volume for a muscle is probably as low as doing like 2 sets a week. And that's like a conservative estimate, meaning like it's probably overdoing it in terms of maintenance. So we usually tell people like 2 sets 2 times a week for most muscles, right? So 4 sets per week. That's probably a gross overestimate. So very little goes a long way. But if somebody who plays rugby, if a CrossFit person, if you're a weightlifter, if you do any of these other sports, what you should be thinking about is maintaining the skills, the feel, the proprioception, and the strategies, the reaction, decision-making involved in making those sports, because those are something tangible that will actually start to go away. And that's what I would be more concerned about for people is don't worry about the muscle as much, worry about some of this other stuff.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really good for a lot of the sport-specific athletes out there, even strength athletes. That's something that is probably one of the most popular misconceptions that I've got to recontext a lot when, training athletes. People think we've just got in our little home gym, we've just got a power rack with a proper setup. We can squat properly, got the Olympic barbell, and it's sick. And I know one of my clients yesterday, he's like, 100 feels heavy. And I'm like, he's like, I'm weak. And I'm like, no. I'm like, you've lost the skill. Like, skill is maintained very frequently. And I said, remember, what am I always saying? He's like, strength is a skill. I'm like, yes. Right. If we think about just trying to move weight, this is when you get injured. I'm like, this is why we see people lifting weights that have no business lifting that weight with a certain body weight, because they are very skillful, and I'm constantly trying to educate clients, even if their goal is not to be powerlifters. I'm like, strength is a skill. It's how well you can move from point A to point B with a given load, in this movement pattern. And like you rightly said, they're the things that, again, people are just so focused on like moving the weight. They're so tunnel visioned rather than actually, like you said, it's like the coordination, it's the flexibility, it's the execution, all these little things, strategies, the mental part of it that comes into it, to the neuroadaptations to actually complete the skill. And I think if you understand that perspective, and again, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated, but you understand that everything I do is a skill, and the more complex it is and the less I'm doing it, I'm kind of not going to be able to move as much within that range of motion. But it's not necessarily just the mechanical aspect of the muscle which is responsible for that. It's more of those neurological adaptations, like you said, practicing it. So like I think Helms is doing, he's going to the park, right? And he's got like 90 and he's been doing some ollie lifting, he's doing like some snatching, and he's just like doing what he can with that volume. But like he said, he's like, I'm just practicing the skill. Even if, God damn it, you had a broom, like, and you try to like, or you just put something like, you're doing ollie lifting, or like you've got like I know Formula One drivers coordination, they do these things with like these little like ping pong balls, and people's like, what's that got to do with driving? I'm like, well, it's coordination, it's fine motor skills, and it's reaction time. And that's what you need when you're in the car. So I think sometimes people don't understand the crossovers. So even like if you're at home, like you said, and it's something different. I mean, maybe going back to gaming as well, they have proven that, it's good for certain games, reaction time. So maybe if you're an athlete, maybe there is some crossover, there, or maybe it's getting outside. And I know my uncle, he used to play football. And he said to me, go find a wall and kick that ball on the wall back and two for hours. I said, what do you mean? He goes, because that ball is going to fire that ball back at you every single time in different forces, in different angles, and you just get to work on your first touch. And you just get good at controlling it, whether it's coming at your head, your shoulders, your arms. He goes, you just got to get so good. He goes, you'll never beat the wall. That's what he used to say. And it's true, because it just pretty much just hammers those skills in, because you don't know where that ball's going to come. Well, it's coming from here, it's coming from there. And you just get all of this practice. So I think that's a really good point, actually, James. And I think for a lot of the sport-specific athletes lifting, and even the more strength-based athletes, I hope that really sets in well and they can understand that, because one, it will sort of dispel a lot of worry and stress, but it might even highlight perhaps where their priorities may lie.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I've done some interesting, I didn't do the research, but I've looked through some research, and there's some really cool stuff on maintenance volume, which I didn't think I would find, but I did find some really, what I think is really neat. It actually pertains to maintaining muscle mass, strength, and some skill stuff to some degree. But what you also find is that you can do mental imagery and visualization training, and that actually can contribute towards a maintenance volume in terms of some of these things. So it's not just thinking about like, oh, I'm thinking about like bicep curl, it's not that. It's more thinking about like, okay, there's movements that I've been training, there's muscles that I've been stimulating. Can I reenact this thing in my mind where I'm thinking about how does the weight feel in my hand? How does it feel to move my wrist closer up to my shoulder? Do I feel the mind muscle connection? Can I reimagine the tension throughput through that joint? Can I imagine the squeeze and the way that the strain? And what they have found is that actually doing dedicated mental imagery and visualization training can actually help you delay things like muscle loss or skill degradation in some cases. So it's one of these things that's like, there's so much that we don't know about it, but it's really interesting. There's really other creative ways to kind of get around some of these things. And even just thinking about moving in a more conscientious and more thoughtful way can prevent some of this negative stuff. Now, I'm not saying that you should sit there and be spending an hour a day, like thinking about like, all right, my gracilis. Okay. I remember doing this thing on my groin and that's how my groin, like there's diminishing returns at some point, I'm sure, but there are muscles where you can think about doing certain movements, doing certain skills like the snatch, clean, and jerk, or even like just doing a squat. Like, okay, I remember how that feels. I remember reenacting these things in my mind in a very thoughtful way. And it works. It's one of these strange things that it actually works. It actually prevents you from losing a little bit of that either muscle fitness or skill or whatever. So there's cool things out there.
Definitely. I think we don't realize how resilient the body is and how complex it is. And I think it's sometimes we forget, and it's a nice little reminder when we hear about some of these concepts and studies, or perhaps when we're in a time like this when we're not focusing on all those day-to-day things, and we can actually perhaps, read some articles or get in touch with some knowledge via podcasts like this or whatever it might be, and go, oh, actually, yeah, that's true. And, oh, this is what's happened in the past with humans. And this is some research. And, oh, wow, these studies have been done and this person has achieved this. And when you kind of unpack that, it's quite incredible to say the least. But
it's cool stuff.
To digress into, before we go, I wouldn't mind, I know it's a big topic, but even just touching base on recovery a little bit and perhaps unpacking a couple of concepts. So I know this again is bespoke to, the stress and stimulus, to the athlete, to the activity that you're doing. But something that I find really fascinating is like what we call contrast healing. There might be another terminology for it as well. And I know, again, I'll use a real life example. So when I was working again at the event center as a lifeguard, I remember the netball players and the basketball players, they had these coaches there, and I remember them, they were putting them in the sauna or the spa, and they were like, had this start like, get out, and then they had these big ice buckets, and they were like, bam, and they were like putting them in there and timing them, and I was just stood there at this point again, like interested in sport, not quite got into my studies yet, and I'm like, what the fuck is all this about? Like, what the hell is it? And I sort of approached one of the coaches one day, and I'm like, hey, what's all this? He's like, oh, it's contrast healing. I'm like, what's this? And he's like, well, it speeds up the recovery, it helps the recovery of the athlete, it kind of stops the damage. He didn't get too technical, he's really cool. And I was like, oh, awesome. And then later on when I was studying, we went into it. There was all obviously different digressions, but what I can remember is that it was like, okay, so you dam the blood. It was like, vasocontraction versus vasodilation, and then it sort of pushes more fresh blood, and again, in my understanding, flushes out more of the waste product faster, reduces inflammation, speeds up recovery, and all this. And I remember, when I was playing football, I had a few injuries, and I tried it. I was like, oh, this shit kind of works. But I'd love for you to maybe actually go in and talk about that properly a little bit, and perhaps other modalities or the most popular modalities and methods that are used, and what are the ones that have actually evidence behind them, compression, etc., heat. Because a lot of people I see, they just think they're like, oh yeah, it's just the sauna or the steam room. And I think sometimes a lot of the time people can be doing harm, or perhaps they're not doing any harm, or they don't quite have it right. So maybe even just adding a little bit of context with that, again, with what we can to simplly it.
Yeah, I'll do my best. This is an easy rabbit hole to go down to. But so
let's
start with contrast is combining the both kind of the benefits of using ice and the benefits of using heat. So one of the proposed mechanisms as to why this method could be effective was they thought it created a mechanical pumping action with the vasoconstriction dilation. So you have like a constrict and then like a rapid dilation. So it was thought to be like a mechanical pumping effect in the vasculature, and that just largely remains uncorroborated. So it's not to say that it couldn't be possible, it just doesn't seem to be distinctly true, even if that effect is happening. That doesn't seem to be causing a distinct benefit, let's say. So we kind of can look at both of them. We say, okay, well, what's the deal with ice? Well, ice is one of the few recovery modalities that actually can enhance recovery of your exercise performance, meaning you go and do some hard training, you get fucked up from that training, you can actually put somebody in an ice bath or do local ice application, and the recovery time course shortens a little bit. So they'll actually be able to go back and perform as well as they did in a shorter amount of time. Pretty cool. It seems to have like a more nervous system effect more than like an actual tissue effect. And it can kind of delay or even kind of blunt a lot of the inflammation from taking place after a hard training session. Now, there's some good and bad with that. So the good is that it shortens the recovery time course. The bad is that it actually blunts or reduces some of the inflammatory responses. So you might be thinking like, how's that bad? Well, it turns out a lot of the inflammation and metabolic accumulation and things like that you get from hard training ends up being one of the secondary, or if not even primary in some cases, stimulators of things like muscle hypertrophy, strength gains, or just anabolism in general. So what ends up happening is when you use something like cold, and heat kind of gets clumped into there as well, what you gain is kind of a cost benefit where you shorten the recovery time course, but you actually reduce the adaptive potential of the training that you did a little bit. So you gain recovery, you lose adaptations to a small degree. So cold's pretty cool in terms of using it when you have athletes who need to be performing on a very frequent time scale. So if you have like any of the footy kind of sports, you can have AFL, rugby, soccer. If they have guys who are playing multiple matches per week, they're not really focusing on gaining fitness. They're focusing on, okay, I had a match on Monday and I have another match on Wednesday. I just need to be able to play as best as I can. Ice bath's really great for that. When it's not a great strategy is when you're primarily focused on fitness. So when people are doing hypertrophy phases or trying to get really, really strong, any of the fitness focused times is probably not the best time to be using the ice bath really heavily. If we go back and we say, okay, what about heat? Heat has kind of the opposite effect of cold. It causes vasodilation, and it causes increases in blood flow to the areas that it's applied to. And what that does is it actually enhances nutrient uptake. So it makes things like amino acids and carbohydrates more readily available to be uptaken by the muscle cell itself, and it helps remove waste products. You run into kind of the same problem where removing waste products seems like a good idea, except it kind of can blunt some of the adaptive processes because the presence of some of those waste products and metabolites can be signals for things like anabolism. So we find kind of a similar relationship there. Heat tends to have what is thought to be a more regenerative effect on the muscle tissue itself, whereas the cold really seemed to affect more of the nervous system qualities of being able to perform well again. So you put both of them together and you get contrast, right? Well, so it seems to kind of tackle both the neural component and the muscle component pretty well. The big downside, I think, about using contrast and any of those methods in general is that it's a huge pain in the ass to set up. It's like you can only do that if you are at like a sports performance facility, because if you're in your house, that means you got to be running from a shower to a tub in another part of the house. Well, immediately you're going to trip on the cat, or your kid's going to get in the way. You're going to slip on your ass down the stairs, or you have to have like 2 different tubs at 2 different temperatures that you're managing. So it's a huge pain. And one of the things that is kind of a big confounder to heat. So one of the reasons why heat might work, which might not be explained by heat alone, is that it's relaxing. And we know that relaxation is probably one of the most powerful recovery modalities out there. So if you take that out, so now instead of just being able to sit in the maybe it's a hot tub or a sauna and just relax for a little while, now you're like, oh shit, it's been 15 minutes. I got to run up there, jump in the ice cold water. And that's going to be a huge shock. And then you go back and forth. So you take that relaxation element out. And so might be diminishing the response. So it is useful. The thing with the heat cold contrast methods is that they are efficacious. They do work. They have a trade-off. You gain a shortened recovery timeline. You lose a little bit of adaptive potential that you could have gained. So what I tell people is it's kind of a death by bee stings. If you do it all the time, it'll start to accrue a significant performance loss across your athlete lifespan. If you use it selectively only when you need to, the effect is so small, it's not a big deal. And it could be potentially useful in many situations. The thing with those is that their effect is so small. So if you want to talk about what's like a meaningful recovery modality, how about sleep? Sleep is something like that. Like if we're talking about sleep, you just throw that shit out the window. You just throw it in the bin, right? There's just no room for discussion because those things are like this. We're talking about like ice, contrast, heat, this, like sleep, this, right? We're talking about a magnitude of effect that's not even on the same scale, right? It's like you got an ant and a Godzilla kind of thing. So they are interesting and they do have like tangible effects, but things like compression, ice, contrast, like they are at the top of the list of the pyramid, right? Meaning like they're the least important. They do have an effect. They are worth pursuing in many instances. Compression's one that has a lot of evidence, a lot of support. There's like hundreds of articles that say like, yeah, this works. But you look at the effect sizes, they're all minuscule. They just don't have a very large effect. Whereas like the big ones for us, and this is kind of getting back into this idea of lifestyle trade-offs, stuff like that. Volume landmarks is what we estimate to be the most important thing. Like if you're not training enough, meaning you're not training at MEV or above, recovery is not a limiting factor for you, homie. You just need to go to the gym more. Get your ass in the gym, right? If you are training above your MRV, meaning you're training more than you can recover from, there's no drink, there's no massage, there's nothing you can do to fix that other than training less, right? So that's like your big choke point right off the bat is you have to manage your training volumes. If you don't do that, nothing else matters, right? The next one, no surprise, is sleep. There's no amount of meth or carbohydrate drinks that you can take in the long term, at least, to get around the need for sleep. You have to sleep. There's no way around it. And it's just one of these things. Again, like I can't reemphasize this idea of being a choke point, meaning like if you don't address the issue of sleep, everything past sleep doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what kind of ice bath you use. Doesn't matter what kind of compression sleeve. Doesn't matter what kind of whey protein you're using. Just throw that all out in the bin because you haven't addressed the second most powerful thing that in our estimation of factors that influence your ability to recover and train hard. And you have to look at it in both directions. You have to look at, am I recovering? Am I doing a good job managing my fatigue? And am I doing it in such a way where I can present a proper overload stimulus the next time I train, right? Because you can kind of just recover and get by, right? Where you're basically training at what we'd say training at your MRV, where you're doing so much training that you're not getting better, but you're recovering the next day and you can get back to training, but you're never making any progress, right? So you want to be training in such a way where you can present a big overload stimulus, recover from that, and be making progress over time. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels. So I tend to kind of push people away when they ask me like, hey, what do you think about ice baths? What do you think about, massage? I kind of say like, we can talk about it, but let's talk about lifestyle. Let's talk about like relaxation, stress management. Let's talk about getting enough sleep. Let's talk about that stuff. That stuff's actually important. Whereas like the ice, the compression sleeves, like, yeah, it's cool and there's something there, but it's like, it's the fun, sexy stuff that doesn't matter. If you take anything home from my talks on recovery, I hope I make clear the basic fundamental things like training reasonably, eating reasonably, having a decent lifestyle, not being a total bogan all the time. Those are the things that matter, right? Like the other fun, sexy stuff that you see, like, oh, should I get acupuncture? Should I do massage? Should I do none of that shit really matters. Like, it's not even the icing on the cake. It's like the candle on the cake, right? It's like, it matters so little. It's really not worth fussing over too much. So I hope I can make that point clear.
Yeah, no, I'll second that. It's a great little sort of frame you said at the end. It's not even the icing, it's the candle. It's great. Don't get me started on sleep. I can hear the listeners rolling their eyes already. I am slamming that down. But I'm like, look, you're going to hate me for this, but you're going to love me for it eventually. Like,
yes.
Wow. Probably the most underrated, powerful factor. I mean, even now, with everything that's going on in the world, the C word, not that C word, guys, the other C word. All right, we're down under.
I was like, which one is it?
Yeah, depends on where you are in the world, but right now this one is unified. But again, it's more than ever. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. But like you said, it's not sexy. You just can't sell it. And again, most people are putting the cart before the horse. And I think it comes down to, once again, the tool belt, right? You've got all different tools depending on what sort of practitioner you are. And it's about using the right tool at the right time, bespoke to that person, that athlete, that clientele in front of you at the time. And again, there is an order of priority, like there is with training, like there is with nutrition, same with lifestyle, same with recovery. And once again, everyone's trying to focus on the needles. They're always focusing on these small points, but it's like, guys, you've not addressed the big thing first. As you said, you can do anything you want. You can do all that. I mean, I always laugh. You see people like trying to get the protein shake in after the workout, like, I've got to get it in at the top. And I'm like, dude, like, you're not even training effectively. Like, you're not even eating effectively. You're not even simply going out partying, taking drugs. I'm like, forget the protein. That's not going to save you. I think the best analogy,
your pee is brown. Like, get out of my face with this protein shake stuff. Like,
yeah,
drink
like
some water.
Yeah, It's literally ridiculous. Like, I think one of the best ones, I'll put this in a real life scenario because I think examples are good. People relate is, now I worked in hospitality for a time when I was younger, and this person was ordering like this BLT with the chips and this, that, and the other. And then they ordered this skim milk coffee, which, might have been fine because it might have just been their preference. But the best part about it was when I was going over the order just to double check if it was correct, I went, hey, I had a skim milk cappuccino. And they made this comment like, oh, well, I'm on a bit of a diet and I'm watching my figure. And I'm like, you've just ordered the BLT
Really?
with chips. You do realize that the skim milk maybe saved you like 100 calories at best. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, you've got it all wrong. But the skim milk cappuccino will give you the deficit. That will save you, bro. But have as many chips and BLTs as you want because that's 0 calories.
Yeah. I mean, you want to throw them a bone and say like, okay, if they have like 3 or 4 cappuccinos a day, every day, then maybe that skim milk will start to have like a tangible effect over time, but like it's a wash when you eat the BLT. Like, come on. Yeah, I'm with you. It's frustrating, but pick and choose your battles, right? And it's like one of those, like we get clients all the time where they say something to the tune of like, they start a diet and they're like, I am not willing to give up my mocha chocolate yaya every day. And it's a hard thing to start because you just tell them like, look, maybe you're not ready to diet yet. Maybe we should just come back and see me a couple months from now. We'll honor whatever program you got, but let's just wait. Because if you're not willing to give up something like a coffee every day, then you're not ready to make any type of sacrifices to get that body composition goal that you want. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. There's certain things that are non-negotiable, and then again, that's where that fine line comes in between. Yes, we can be, there's flexibility. It's like, yeah, we can make it as flexible as we can, but like anything, there's a cutoff point where it's like, you gotta do the work. Like, you gotta be willing to, put some discipline in. Like, there's no way around it at the end of the day, but everyone's still looking for that magic pill. So I think that was a good little synopsis on recovery, because I think it sort of makes people realize, and I hope it does, and if not, to reconfirm that for the listeners, that again, it's about the context and understanding the order of priority, and that although there are some really fun, interesting, modalities that you can use in there, again, a lot of that is not going to be bespoke or specific to most people because they're just not at that level, and they don't need to go to cryogenic therapies and chambers and all this. And once again, it's just another way for people and businesses to make money, because it's another thing that you can be buying, like a supplement or something else to be adding on. And it might only be $10 or $15 a week, but that shit adds up. So again, I think get your priorities right. And yeah, again, as and when, use the tools wisely.
Totally agree.
But before we wrap things up, as always, got some rapid fire questions for you, my man. So
no.
Yeah, these are going to be good, I feel. And again, like this, I'll make it a bit more bespoke to this situation at the minute that we find ourselves in, because I think there's a few fun ones. So the first one would be, and it might be where you are now, but if you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow, and I mean like anywhere, like where would it be and why? Like it could be like in a bowling alley. Like, I don't know, like what would be, where would you wake up?
So my wife and I bought a house in Montana, and the people we bought it from were in like their 70s, and it was wintertime in Montana, and it's in the mountains. And so they have been renting that house back from us. So
Hey.
I want to live in the house that I purchased with my wife and my cat. That's where I would want to wake up. Right now we're living in my wife's house in Southern California. So I've been dying to move to this house that we purchased in Montana because it's really beautiful out there, and we've been just so amped to get out there. So that's where I would like to wake up with my family.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, especially in this situation. And you've earned it, my friend. But hey, better late than never. I'm sure it'll be worth the wait.
Definitely.
All right, my second question. This one I ask everyone because I think it's pretty fun. It's a popular one. If you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's so tough. Because it also
but you can make it up though. You can make it up. Like you can just anything. Nothing is off the table here.
I think I would be into like the powers that are kind of in the realm of invulnerability, like things where you could just take an obscene amount of physical damage and be largely unscathed, because I think you could do an immense amount of good having that kind of power. Like super strength would be sweet, invisibility sweet, Wolverine claws or regenerative kind of stuff. All of those are sweet. I watch way too much of this hero shit. That's why I'm having struggling with. But I think the ones where you're kind of impervious to a lot of physical damage are probably the most useful and cool.
100%. I think it's almost like, because that's a question, right? Like you get that from an early age, like, oh, what superhero is your favorite? What would you be? What would be your superpower? And it's like Superman. Like some people, like right? Like so, you are a Superman or you're not a Superman fan. And the reason being is, so for the people who are Superman fans, like, well, he's the best, right? And then the people who are not Superman people are like, or Superwoman are like, yeah, I agree, but that's the point. He's too good. Like you can't be, like he's got everything. You can't beat that guy.
I'm a DC fan, and I read a lot of the Superman stuff, and he's just, it's hard. There is one really good book. It's called All-Star Superman. It's actually one of the best graphic novels, and I'm reluctant to say it because I usually am poo-poo Superman, but it's honestly awesome. It's one of those really good ones. And I don't know if you guys are into anime. My Hero Academia is really good, and they do a lot of fun superpower stuff. Venture Brothers, another really good one. One Punch Man, another really good one that deals with superhero stuff. I could go on for days, but yeah.
Oh, this is good. It's good. I think the anime is good, and especially at this time as well. It's really good to delve into that sort of stuff, and I think everyone's fascinated with that. Right, goes back to the psychology, the hero's journey. There's a lot of psychology in that, and why we're attracted to those sort of characteristics, if you will. Yes. And my last one is a bit of a. Oh, we'll go with this one. We'll go with a bit of a curveball. If you could invite someone around a table, dead or alive, to have a conversation with, who would it be?
Oh man, that's a really tough one.
I mean, it could be anyone. It could be a family member. It could be someone you wanted to meet. It could be like Einstein. I don't know. It could be a made-up, non-fictional or fictional character or whatever it might be.
Oh, it could be a fictional character?
Oh, it could be anyone. That's what I mean. Like, there's no rules.
Oh, fuck yeah. Batman. Easy.
There you go.
Bro. I'm thinking about real people. I'm like, fuck yeah.
So good. But which one? From which universe?
Ooh.
From which paradigm? Because I mean, by the way, have you heard about who the latest Batman is meant to be?
Oh yes, I did. But I forgot. I remember seeing it on my feed, and I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article. Fuck, I forgot. Who is it?
Terrible names. The guy to Twilight.
Oh, that's right.
Edward. Whatever his name is, I don't know.
You know what? I'm all for it. I haven't been a big fan of the Batman movies. I really liked Batman in like the kind of the Death in the Family, the new 22 Death in the Family series, which I'm nerding out right now. Sorry, but that's probably like one of my favorite lines of Batman. Or the Batman, like the old salty Batman from Dark Knight Returns, where he's like kind of old and he's like 400 pounds of muscle, just outrageously large.
I'm a fan of the darker, like the darker, where he's a bit more, because he would be, right? Like, I mean, again, the people who are in the comics and they're like, oh, this is how it should be. And I'm like, I get that. Like, that's the history, like, good. So it's always like people who read a book versus watch a movie, like, the book's better. I'm like, yeah, it's good, but it's a movie. You got to make it, whatever. Everyone's got their interpretation, but like that dark, a bit more hard, kind of, a lot of movies are going that way now. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at not even the superhero movies, even look at like James Bond, look at like, he's always been a womanizer, but now look at the Daniel Craig, like he's a bit more rough around the edge. He's got a bit more of a physique, that's the way it's going. And I think that was what was cool about, the Dark Knight Batman. He was a bit, he's a bit rustic.
Edgy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw a Bond movie the other day. It was one of the Sean Connery ones. I was like, this is lame. Who liked this?
Oh man. I mean, classic.
It's like silly now. Yeah. It's just like goofy.
Oh, mate, but the thing is that they're funny, because like that's the thing. Yeah. It's like, you hear like the sound. It's like the very first Batman and Robin. Pow! Like it's
pow.
It's so funny. Like it's actually it's that bad. It's good, but
yes,
it was entertaining. And I mean, James Bond, man, he's sleeping with about three girls in one scene. You're like, Jesus Christ, what sort of movie is this? I mean, he was, he's doing more back then. You're like, whoa. So,
some of those didn't age super well either with the PC culture.
No. Yeah, I know. Some of the old movies, some of the terminology, you're like, how do we get away from this? And then now 2020, it's just really out of hand. You can't say shit. It's bullshit, man. Honestly, it's like, like a 2020, anything goes. So maybe this whole thing that's happening at the minute is a bit of a reshake up and a recalibration for humankind as we know.
I hope so. People can be less fussy about what words they want to be mad about.
Well, exactly, right? Let's just like get perspective again, people. But James, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Before we head off, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you, what you do, whether that's following along with the Doom journey or more sports science
God,
related?
no more Doom. It stresses me out. Yeah, so you can find me on any of the RP stuff. Dr. Mike and I do a weekly webinar on YouTube. So if you just go on the Renaissance Periodization YouTube and subscribe, there's a bunch of my videos from RP Plus on there. There's a weekly webinar where you can ask Mike and I questions. RP Plus is a really good service where I have a bunch of my lectures are put on there. You can ask Mike and I questions directly on the webinar. And then if you have like Audible, you can hear some of our audiobooks, and I'm actually the narrator. So if you found my voice to be melodious, you can hear me on the Recovering from Training book, the RP Diet 2.0 book on there. And yeah, I'm on social media, but I'm not super active. I'm not like Dr. Mike posting my macros or my workouts, but I do post pictures of my fat cat periodically, and that is what I like. It's like a big manatee.
That's great. Well, for the fat cat enthusiasts, that'll be great. But of course, I'll put all the links in the description below. And yes, you have a very audible voice, very listenable, very entertaining and passionate. I have enjoyed the conversation. No, it's been great. And I'm sure we'll reconnect at some point. And I look forward to catching up in person, whether it's with the koala bears or without them,
yes.
Depending on how things go. But yeah, I appreciate your time. And guys, as always, thank you for listening. Make sure if you are listening on iTunes or Spotify, leave a rating and a review if you liked it. If you don't do it, obviously. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. I've got to say it, guys. And as always, until next time, stay fearless and stay corona free.